Good morning, afternoon, good day to everyone. Welcome to our workshop on planning for project-based learning. As we end this year, this is a good way to kind of kickstart our summer planning and get ready for the following school year. So we're going to start, this is actually part one. So we're going to be diving into how we go about planning and the pre-planning. This month, and then next month, we're going to be following up with looking at how do we actually drive it, and how do we look at assessing our project-based learning. So welcome, and I hope that you all can not only participate with us today for this one, but also continue this conversation into next month. So I want to introduce myself again. My name is Holly Denard. I'm going to be your primary facilitator here today, but you can see this is our team. This is our professional learning team, myself, and then we have David Tong that was speaking to you just a minute ago. We have Jason Porter, and we also have Carmen, and we have Jess Kessler as well. So everybody's waving. We're all going to be a part of this workshop today and really dive into this idea of project-based learning. So I want to start with a little setting of some norms, setting the stage. Again, if you all can keep your microphones on mute when there's a lot of background noise, but we would love to see your faces. This is the way we interact with you. This is the way we want to, we kind of share thoughts and ideas and really get the most out of this workshop. So again, this is going to be very interactive. We're going to be moving into some small groups. We're going to be collaborating, communicating, and doing and sharing a lot of ideas. So we really would like you guys to please share out in the chat if there's questions or just comments, ideas you would like to share. Also want to share with you some information about what we're going to be using today. We're going to be using breakout rooms and this Zoom feature. We're going to be using two Google features and their suite called Jamboard, and we're also going to be using Google Slides today, and of course using the chat and mic features. So you'll see these little icons throughout the presentation. So what are we actually doing today? What is on the agenda? So we're going to be talking about what is project-based learning, really get a good frame of reference about what that actually means, not only for ourselves, but holistically look at what project-based learning is. Again, we're going to be diving into planning. How do we actually plan for this? What does that pre-planning stage look like? And how do we keep that project-based learning unit going throughout the series of lessons? And then we're going to be looking at a mock example of a project-based learning unit that not necessarily to take and plop into your own curriculum, but just to use as an example of the certain pieces that we're going to be talking about today. So that's really what is on the agenda. I want to go ahead and start with just getting everyone's thoughts around what project-based learning is. So we're going to be using Jamboard for this. And for those of you guys that have not had an opportunity to dive into what Jamboard is all about, in a moment, you're going to get a link in the chat that it's going to connect you to this Jamboard slide. And the way we're going to interact with Jamboard, and really what Jamboard is all about, is a blank canvas. A whiteboard, if you will, to share some thoughts and ideas. So as we're talking about this, I see people are jumping right in, but what we're going to use is the tools over here on the left-hand side. So you can see there's a pen, there's an eraser. What we're going to use today for this particular activity is what's called the sticky note. So you can see I'm going to click on the sticky note icon in the toolbox on the left-hand side. It will have a pop-up screen, much like you would use a Post-it note. You can change your color. You can use whatever color you want. And you're basically going to just type something and save it right here, and it will pop up on our blank canvas where you can kind of organize it and put wherever you want. So that is how we're going to interact with this Jamboard. I'm going to go ahead and show you that if you click on those three dots, the more I can actually edit, duplicate, and or delete. So I really want to hear what your thoughts are around what is project-based learning. What do you think of when you hear the words project-based learning? So go ahead, go in there, share out what your thoughts using those sticky notes. If you're really having troubles, please just let us know. Oh, I see somebody already popping right in there. If you're having troubles, go ahead and just share out in the chat. I love this one, teaching content through a project specific to the topic. All right, love it. Project-based learning is also about hands-on activities that is really relevant to what students are learning. Tiffany is sharing assessing student knowledge of a specific skill by creating a final project. All right, so we're already looking at how we want students to end by that idea of assessment. Thanks, Tiffany, for sharing that one out. We're also have shared that project-based learning is you have a specific topic and work around that topic in different ways. So maybe different ways to set up activities that will lead them towards their end product. All right, continue to go ahead and share your ideas about what project-based learning this is going to be up here for a little while. So you can use this as a takeaway, something that you can keep as we dive more into what project-based learning is. So all of you all have some great ideas around what project-based learning is. I want to share a definition that we have developed here around what project-based learning is and what it is for not only us, but for students. So it really is an instructional strategy that focuses on how students demonstrate and develop a deeper understanding of key concepts and the application of those concepts in real-world contexts. So keeping those connections to what students would really, what somebody might be doing actually in the real world. It allows also for more student voice and student agency. And it ultimately builds those skills for not only career, college, but for life, those success skills. So I wanted to share out a lot of making connections to what you all shared in not only on our Jamboard, but in the chat box, and really tie that all together. So as we move into developing and out a project-based learning unit, the big question always is, where do I start? Where do I begin? So really want to frame today and how we're going to approach building out and planning for a project-based learning unit is to think about the end in mind. In other words, we don't want to start planning until we know where we want students to end up. Where do we want them to be in their understanding and learning by the end of the project? So keeping the end in mind is really going to be how we're going to frame our planning as we start diving into different pieces and components of project-based learning. So we want to know how students physically are going to demonstrate their key learning and concepts by the end of the unit. And will it be a physical product or will it be a presentation? So there's many ways that students can demonstrate their learning. It doesn't have to be always in a physical product. So we want to also keep that in mind. So really what we want to do is to keep that end in mind. So in the chat box, we're going to be sharing a template to really kind of frame out our pre-planning. So, and the chat box, David has just posted the link to this pre-planning document that we have here. We're going to be going through each step of this pre-planning guide. So I know it's going to be super tempting now that you've got that link. You're going to be looking at every single page of it. But I want you to really hang on and and work with me throughout this workshop so that we can really dive into each component of the pre-planning guide. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Anyone with any questions or thoughts as we dive into this next piece? Don't be shy.
I do have a question. I apologize.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tiffany.
So I'm a librarian, right? And I attend all of the, well, I won't say all, but quite a few of the Tiger Woods Foundation workshops. My question is, I guess I have a pretty good understanding of what project-based is, right? But I'm trying to find out, because I'm a librarian and maker spaces are so common in libraries now, is makerspace considered project-based learning?
So I to really answer that specifically, Tiffany, I think it's the way you frame your makerspace and what you do with it to really share whether or not that is project-based learning or not. So as we go through today, kind of reflect as how you're using your makerspace and you're in the library. And think about, well, yes, I see components and pieces of what I do already in what we're going to be discussing today and where I might want to add some things. Okay, so really look at it as I'm not exactly sure how you're using your makerspace, but that's really the big question is really thinking about not just doing a project for project's sake, but really think about the other aspects. What do we want students to understand and know by the end of going through this particular set of activities? Does that help, Tiffany?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So as we move on, we're going to come back to each component. But the first thing I do want to start with is that essential question, because I think this is a really one of the challenging aspects of designing our project-based learning unit is how do we keep students engaged throughout the project? How do we sustain that inquiry and engagement? So the good essential question is it should be designed to keep that in front of mind. In other words, that is what you want students to be able to do and understand in that essential question. So we're going to go through a small activity here on how to design and what a good essential question looks like. For a project-based learning unit, it doesn't mean that we only have one essential question. We might have a series of essential questions that we introduce to students. And this should be introduced to students, not just kept for ourselves and our own planning. So we're going to dive into looking at different questions and determining whether or not we would consider them good assumptions or maybe not really good examples, or what we're going to coin here as non-essential questions. So I'm going to share with you guys a document. We are going to be moving into breakout rooms. You're going to work collaboratively, share your thoughts with one another, because this is how we really get different perspectives and we really grow from. So on the document, you're going to see, this is a screenshot of it, series of different questions. On the left-hand side, you're going to be determining in the column to the left whether or not you think a particular question would be essential or would be non-essential. So if you feel like, yeah, this is a good question, it's going to help students sustain inquiry and engagement, and it's broad enough for to go through the project-based learning unit. So put an E where you think it would be essential, and N where you think it would not really represent a good essential question. And then at the bottom, based on all the questions that you determine as essential, think about and discuss what are those characteristics of that question that really made it essential or are not essential and not a good example. All right, so in the chat box, there is a link. I'm going to share with you again the document online, what it looks like. You're going to be in a breakout room. There's several different slides. Your breakout room number is going to correspond to the slide number that you're going to use. So if you happen to be in breakout room number 1, you're going to make sure that you're interacting on the slide number 1 where it says group 1. If you're in breakout room 2, you'll be using the second slide for group 2. So I'm going to stop here. Any questions right now before I send you into breakout rooms to have this awesome conversation with one another? All right, let's see what we come up with. And at the end, we're going to spend about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, kind of looking at these questions, deciding on what characteristics of these good essential questions we would write. And then we're going to come back and share out some of our thoughts and ideas. All right, there's no questions. I'm going to have David send you all into breakout rooms.
Okay, yeah, in just a moment, you all will be automatically moved into breakout rooms. Feel free to say hello to your small groups. And then again, if you're in room 1, use the first slide that Holly has shared. And if you're in room 2, then jump to the second slide. Okay, so we'll have about 15 minutes and I'll send little notes here and there in terms of how much time we have left. Otherwise, go ahead and tackle those essential and non-essential questions.
Welcome back. Wow, looks like some great conversation was had during this breakout. I'm really curious. I would love for one of you all to share some of the conversation you had around essential questions and what you decided as characteristics, some great ideas around what you decide are characteristics and the criteria that makes up that good essential question. Would anyone be brave enough to share out some of what you all were talking about?
I can share for our group.
Thanks, Tiffany.
No problem. So basically, after answering all the questions, we kind of went back to analyze, what exactly we thought they had in common, the qualities they had in common. And what we discovered was there's usually some kind of end result. It provides some evidence to support your response. It usually generates discussion or debate around the proposed question. And it's usually an open-ended question, which allows you, to have more discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you all came up with that fact that it generates that discussion, because that's what we want students to really be able to do is to have those conversations, to have those debates. And if we have a close-ended question, that doesn't really promote that type of conversation with our students. So allowing an avenue for them to have those conversations really keeps them engaged and continues to kind of generate more questions as they have these conversations. Yeah, great job, you guys. Anyone else want to share out anything that came up during your conversation around essential and maybe what is non-essential? Anyone else have thoughts? All right, being really quiet today. So we will move on. Please share out in the chat box anytime anything comes to mind at any point during the workshop. So want to share out a couple of additional things. Again, you guys came up with most of these characteristics as you went through that exercise and looking at essential and non-essential. They do not or need to have a right answer. We want them to continue questioning. So there is not really a yes or no. They want to provoke and sustain student inquiry, much what you all have put down in your characteristics. Also, these questions, essential questions, want to increase in complexity as students move through grade levels. So we could have a essential question, for an example, how are form and function related in primary grades, but that question becomes a bit more complicated and more sophisticated as we move up into grade levels. So essential questions can continue from very young age all the way through 12th grade. So think about that as well as you design your essential questions. They can also lead to questions within or across subjects. So we might be focusing on language arts and our essential questions, but that might also lead to things that might bring questions in terms of history and something that students are also engaged in other subject areas. They connect to prior knowledge and continue that metacognitive. So we also want to make sure that these essential questions have some connection to what students have known or are learning prior to what we're sharing with them now. And they also allow students to think like an expert. So gives them that agency, that ability to think about how this might be in the real world. So we're going to dive now into that pre-planner. We're going to look at how we design that final project, how we keep that front of mind. We know we need to keep our curricular goals in mind. What are our standards that we need to hit, in other words? And what do we want students to understand throughout or by the end of this project-based learning? So we're going to actually now dive into designing an essential question, but I want to set the frame because we need to know what this project is all going to be about. And for our purposes in this workshop, we don't have time to really lay out a project-based learning unit. That takes a lot of time. So I'm going to do a little bit of the pre-planning, and then we're going to jump into really looking at how we would design an essential question. So starting with that final product, we don't necessarily want to give students what they're going to be designing or doing as their final product, but we do want to have an idea of where we want them to be. What do we want them to understand? So your final product is really a way that students will demonstrate their understanding of the topic. So for our purposes in this mock lesson that we're going to be doing, we want them to understand maybe the main themes of the book, because we're in a literature class. We're in a high school literature class. So we want to incorporate more than one avenue of expressions in their final product. So we set the stage for our students. We communicate to them, this is where we want them to be by the end of the project, okay? So we're in a literature class, we're going to be reading a book. We want them to build in maybe a writing and a media, speaking and visual arts. So we want them to think cross-curricular in our final product. We want to keep our curricular goals in mind. What is the standard that is going to be front of mind when we design this project-based learning unit? For a high school literacy class, we wanted maybe have students understand point of view, what satire, sarcasm, irony is in our standard. So this is our standard for our high school literature class. And then our learning outcomes. What do we want students to understand by the end of this particular project-based learning unit? So we might want them to understand that novelists often provide insights about human experiences through fictional means. So we are going to bring in actual events or experiences that we all have, but we're going to present it in a fictional way. So we want them to understand not only that, but maybe some misunderstandings can also provide crucial insights. So these are all our learning outcomes. And in this book, we want them to understand maybe the main themes, this idea of what the American dream is. So these are our learning outcomes. This document we're actually going to put in the chat box for you all to have as a reference, because what we're going to do is think about how we're going to write an essential question that will drive this project-based learning unit that has this final product, curricular goals and learning outcomes in mind. So because we don't have a lot of time to actually come up with a final product or direction for our final project, I'm going to kind of set the stage and give you guys what your group's final project is. So keeping in mind those two different mediums, what we want students to be able to do, and our final project is, your project is going to be The Great Gatsby Goes Instagram. So in this project, you're going to be using digital design and media and the main characters of the book to create Instagram accounts based on the perspectives of these main characters. All right, so we're going to bring Gatsby to the 21st century and create Instagram accounts. All right, I'm going to pause for just one moment to see if there's any questions so far. All right, so given this is your final project, let's go ahead, get back into our breakout rooms, but this time we're not going to be looking at examples of essential questions. You're going to be taking those characteristics that you designated in the first breakout rooms as to what a good essential question is, and generating and brainstorming ideas. What would be an essential question that you would use for students to drive them towards this end product and project that they're designing, The Great Gatsby Goes Instagram. So you're going to have a Google Doc, and we're going to put the link again in the chat box, and you're going to go ahead on this document. Oh, here's the document to guide you. And here is your document to generate ideas around what might be a good essential question to keep students engaged and sustain inquiry throughout the PBL unit. All right, I see everybody's hopping in there. Again, if you're in group 1, go ahead and use the first slide, and so on. Whatever group number you're in is the slide number you will be utilizing. All right, any questions? All right, David, we're going to go ahead and send people off. We're going to have about 10 minutes, and I know this is a really short amount of time, but it's more about going through this process of how you're going to do your pre-planning than it is, oh, we're going to have this perfect essential question by the end of this 10 minutes. So it's more about the process and the conversation that you all are going to have in your small group, and kind of collaborate with your ideas and how you might approach writing your essential question or questions. All right, so we're going to send you all off for about 10 minutes and see what we can come up with, and have fun.
All right, so you guys all see in the chat, there's 2 links. The first one, as Holly mentioned, is to the bigger ideas of the final product, the goals, and the outcomes. And then the second link is to just jotting down those essential question ideas in the Great Gatsby project. So I'll launch you all into your breakout rooms and have a great discussion.
Welcome back, you guys. So creative. You guys really did a great job brainstorming some very, very innovative and creative essential questions that will drive them towards this end product. I really want to have you all share out, like, what was your conversation? What were some challenges you might have had as you went through this process? Did you feel like you got stuck anywhere, or really just share out some of what you all discussed while you were coming up with these very creative questions? Anyone want to share out?
I'll try. I mean, first I want to give, credit to Tiffany. She did a great job leading our group, typing this stuff in. As we were trying to figure out what we wanted to say. But I think for a lot of us, we were trying to actually remember what the book was and what it was about. We kind of had an idea what the time period was. So we was trying to figure that out. And then, I know for me, I just had to look it up. Okay, what was this book about? And then trying to relate. Then the other thing is funny that, all of us kind of told our age because none of us knew what Instagram was meant for. So we kind of got stuck on that. We had to figure that out. Okay, Instagram is pictures. Okay, now we got an idea what we were doing. But it was a great conversation just, to collaborate and, not feel like you were wrong. Because I was like, I don't know what Instagram is, but we all realized none of us really knew what it was. So once we figured out what it was just trying to, okay, let's equate that to what had been there and how to do, what would we do now?
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it. And I threw you all into not only not knowing what the book was about, but again, Instagram being something that is not something used personally. So a lot of unknowns. But I think really what came out of that is some great questions that that will really, really keep students and kept me kind of engaged in looking at what you were going to write next. So I love this idea of how did the time period impact the characters in the story? That's really something that we would want them to know, whether or not they were creating this Instagram account. So really understanding that impact as well. So great questions, and what was happening during Great Gatsby time versus our time period. That's really, sometimes that's what are some misunderstandings by students, is that whatever happened in the 1920s or 30s isn't necessarily what is happening now. And that is a big misunderstanding, that there's very similar things, events and perspectives that people had during that time period that are also very common in the 21st century. So great questions, just to stimulate and continue having students discuss the main themes of that book. Anybody else? Tiffany, you want to jump in there?
I do, Holly. You know what? Honestly, I can't now. I assume that the more practice you get, the less time this would take, right? Mm-hmm. But so I taught for 10 years before I became a librarian. And the little bit of time that we had to plan, I mean, it may have been for one subject. And everybody, if you're an elementary school teacher, you teach many subjects. Mm-hmm. I think for me, there's no way, going back, taking this information today, would I be able to just formulate an essential question in the short amount of planning time that I get? And also, too, teachers don't get enough time to collaborate. I really found that having more than just one voice, you know what I mean? It really brought more to the table than me sitting, even just running my ideas past someone. I didn't even feel confident. Just, I'm looking at the question. I'm like, am I on the right path, or do I need to? But I think a lot of this, to me, and this is great. I enjoyed the collaboration, number one. Number two, I get concerned about the amount of time. But this is great. I'm assuming the more practice you get, the less time you would need.
Okay, so there's so many things you just said right there, Dee. I want to kind of break it down in terms of not only is this a struggle for us to go through as educators, in other words, am I on the right track in developing this essential question? Our students need to go through these kind of struggles as well. And so that's why these opportunities to sit and collaborate and work on projects together really are developing those critical skills that they need to have to be successful. So kind of what you said, Tiffany, is a lot of parts in there, but a lot, as you know, our developing or wanting to collaborate is really about what our students really need and want as well, because their perspectives become validated. In other words, what you were sharing with the group just now was very, very much like, oh, am I on the right track? But as you went through it and you shared out your ideas, it was like, oh, wow, I am on the right track. You know, this is a good direction, and other people can build on others' comments and ideas. So I think in as much as what you're saying, yes, we don't have enough time. How do we get there? And how do we start small? How do we start these conversations with colleagues? And how do we start making this change? Because it is crucial and beneficial for us to have as educators. And then we know if that's something that is positive for us as educators, how powerful that can be for our students as well, because they need to go through these same struggles. So start small. I think that's just the key here. Add, do little things, start on one small project at a time. Could be something that you're going to develop over a long period of time, not just, oh, I'm going to start it tomorrow. So I think that's my reflection on what you've said and what you were sharing with the group. So
can I ask you one other question, Holly? Would you allow your students to pick, or would you only start with one essential question?
I think it depends on how complex your curricular goals are and where you want them to be and what your learning outcomes are at the end. I think just one essential question may not capture all of what you want students to question and dive into. And I really think it's all about the complexity of what project you're really trying to do with students.
Okay.
If I could say something, I like something that Cordis did. Cordis was actually looking at the outline and what the end result was. And I think that helped us tend to get to the questions. I mean, for me, in using this just in because I teach finance, I'm going to tell them here's what, we're looking to answer. And then give them the option to come up with the ideas of what they want to do, and I also like the idea. I like the time we was under the crunch. I think that students need to be somewhere under the crunch, which makes them have to communicate and talk. If we tell them, to me, I know for my students, if I tell them Monday, I need this by Friday, they're not going to work until last minute, and then it's going to be rushed. But if we put, hey, by the end of the day, I need to see this much progression. Now they're communicating, and I think with PBL, I think that's one of the main things from what I envision with it, is students interacting with each other and trying to solve something together.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other piece of what you're saying as well is we know we only have a certain amount of time to dedicate to this project-based learning unit. So keeping ourselves as well as our students accountable for that time frame and only designating certain amount of time to get certain pieces accomplished. So in as much as, I probably would have dedicated more time for that particular activity, but y'all knew you had to get some ideas moving and things, really dive into thinking. So it did kind of stimulate that feeling of like, wow, I need to accomplish or get something down on paper. So thanks, you guys. You guys did a lot of hard work. The last piece that I'd like to share out for today, and we're not going to be able to have as much time as I would like, but this is the idea of once we know where we want students to be by the end of the project-based learning unit, what our curricular goals are, what we want them to understand by the end of it, now we need to map out how we're going to specifically get them there. So what are those specific learning activities that students will need to do in order to be able to come up with that final project idea and really understand the concepts of your curricular goals, your curricular standards. So with that, it's called content mapping. So it's looking at specific things that students will have to know and what they're going to be able to have to do by the end of it. So what you want students to know are things like what vocabulary words. If this particular literature book, they have to understand what a satire is or sarcasm or something, we need to introduce those vocabulary words so that they can use that as they move through their understanding of the deeper themes of the book, for instance. We might need key facts. Students to understand key facts, maybe important events and people. What was it like during this time period? That might be unfamiliar with our students. So what do we need them to know? And then what do we want students to be able to do? Do we need them to make inferences, to interpret information? Do we want them to do some research or to do some investigating? So really looking at these things, what do we want them to know and what do we want them to be able to do in order to drive the activities that students will need to do throughout the PBL unit. So we're not going to have a lot of time, but I do want you guys to kind of dive in and just throw out a couple of ideas on what it is that what activities you might want students to do in order to get to that end understanding or your learning outcomes. So here's another document. We're going to share it in the chat box. We're not going to be able to spend too much time because we're nearing the end of our workshop. But this is all, if you all join us in June for the continuing of this conversation, these are all the steps that we need to consider while we're planning, while we're doing that pre-planning. So the document, David just shared, excuse me, I've been talking too much, I know when I start choking. The document is in the chat box, the link to it. Again, we're going to be using slide number 1. And we're only going to have a couple minutes. It may be that we don't get anything down on this slide, but just a brief conversation with one another to kind of think about what activities we want or we would want students to do. So throw out anything and everything, be creative, and we're going to spend about 5 minutes doing this. So just wanted to present an idea in a way like this is how a progression of pre-planning might be. So once we have like our final project ideas, we know what our curricular goals are, we know what we want students to understand and do. Then we would create our activities and then place them in our sequence in our unit in order from what they would do first to towards the very end. So with a very limited amount of time, anyone want to share out maybe just some of your conversation around what you might want to put as your learning activities for this particular project?
I think one of the things we were just talking about was just trying to get our minds around how to condense what we want students to know and to do into that activity. And so some of our conversation had to do with maybe after reading a chapter, they're going to create a series of posts that reflect the American dream, or, you know, different captions about the other things that were listed in the learning outcomes.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. So kind of breaking down the novel by chapters so that they can get a good handle and keep the end point in mind. I love that. I love that. So a lot of different directions, and this would typically take a long time and a lot of planning to get through this piece of the PBL unit. But this is just a beginning to start us thinking, what do I need to do at each step of the way? Where do I need to start, and where am I going to end in my planning? So unfortunately, we are getting towards the end, but I do want to kind of throw out this idea of what was something that was an aha today, what was a takeaway, what are some things that really made you think perhaps about project-based learning unit that you may not have thought about before starting the workshop. Anyone want to share in the chat, or just, I know the dog is super cute, like we want to just keep looking at the doggy, but anyone want to share out any thoughts about what we've done today?
I just want to say thanks for offering the training, even though you had such a small group. So we appreciate having the opportunity to learn from you guys. Every time I join, it's been excellent. So thanks for all the hard work you guys put in. And we feel kind of privileged just to be here today. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I enjoy your company every time you join us, Cordes.
Well, this is my first time being on one. I actually enjoyed it, learning this. I've always wondered about this, how to do this and how to transition some of my lessons and coursework to this. So this is a great venue for me to actually see how it works and see how it's laid out, and start developing some ideas over the summer for next school year.
Woo. Summer planning, right?
Yeah, I think we always like small. This is a teacher's dream, right? To have a small teacher, student ratio in a sense. So we love, whether it be a larger group when we have in the summers with our STEM studio trainings, or with our monthly workshops, depending on the time of year. We do know May and June are very hard times for teachers to join. So, depending on your role and whatnot, we're happy that you all were able to join us this morning.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Actually, David, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know I didn't give you a lot of time to kind of wrap this up, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to look forward to what's coming up next.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time, but I just want to share with you all, the continued learning opportunities for professional development in education. So we've actually recently developed this professional learning pathway. I also shared it in the chat. You can read it on your own time, but it really talks about the long-term growth that you can join in our professional learning program. Includes many different workshops, micro-credentials, being able to participate in cohorts of other teachers. And these are longer trainings, so these aren't the monthly workshops, but we'll still continue to have these monthly workshops in the following academic year as well. But this summer, we have two different STEM studio offerings, essentially part of our professional learning pathway. The first is the inquiry mindset. This is one of our foundational inquiry sessions, where it's a 3-day virtual experience, and you'll be able to learn a bit more about our programs. And then what I do want to also share is this professional learning pathway. So as I mentioned, we have the micro-credential. There's an independent project as well that we'll support you in. So this is kind of like the implementation, right? So how do we get those ideas to produce, what we really want to produce to impact our students? But we'll actually working more closely with each of our educators that go through that independent project, which results in an inquiry certificate. So this is our kind of long-term pathway for educators. You all can go as quickly or as however you want to pace it out. It could be a quick 1-year process. It could be multiple years. But this is really what we're learning from our educators, that they actually would love the long-term progression. So we've connected all the dots together. But again, feel free to add it to your reading list on the website. You can find more details and videos. All right, and then the last thing I just wanted to share is a survey. As you all know, we love our surveys. But this here, I'm gonna paste in the chat. As you're able to complete it, there's no registration code required. Love to get your feedback. If there's questions pertaining to DoD, which is the Department of Defense, you can just click not at all or none of the above when you see those questions with DoD. All right, otherwise, we appreciate the time you spent with us today. Again, all the resources we have on our websites, YouTube videos, we're going to post this as well on our YouTube channel for reference if you wanted to kind of dig back into some of the content discussions. But otherwise, you know, feel free to connect with us at any time. We'll be around, and especially it'll be a fun summer. So if you have an opportunity, join us this summer at our Inquiry Mindset trainings.
So join us on June 9th for the PBL 2.0.